So identification of the ions and the gases. The last question we discussed was question 6. Just a minute, I will share the question. Okay, identification of the ions and the gases. We have a solid E, a compound is there, solid E. Analyze, and it is aluminium salt. You can use that table, identification of the ions and the gases table. First, appearance of this solid E, it appear a white solid, white crystalline solid. What this indicates? No, so there is no transition element. Because if it is a white compound, there is no transition. If it's a colored compound, even a black is written, we'll say there's a transition element. So white shows that there is no transition element. Then a little of a solid E was heated in a test tube. Colorless drops of a liquid formed at the top of the test tube. Like whenever a solid is heated and we observe a condensation near the mouth of the test tube, what this indicates? What this test indicates? So water crystallization. It is a hydrated salt. The salt, this is a hydrated salt or it contains water of crystallization. Because hydrated salt on heating release the water molecule. A little of a solid E was dissolved in a distilled water. The solution was divided into 4 parts. So these are the tests which are done on 4 different parts. And they already mentioned that this is aluminium salt. What else with aluminium, we don't know. To the first test tube, drops of sodium hydroxide were added. Like when we add small amount, what we'll observe? Aluminium salts, aluminium ions, and we add sodium hydroxide. What is the observation? You can use that table. That's right. So it will be a white PPT. So white precipitate or white PPT is there. Whenever aluminium salt added, we add sodium hydroxide, so it will result in a formation of a white precipitate. And if we add an excess of a sodium hydroxide, what will the observation? Excess of sodium hydroxide. What is the observation? So it will dissolve. Yeah. It will dissolve. First, it's when we add sodium hydroxide, few drops, it will be white precipitate, but in excess, what will happen? So in excess, what will happen? The precipitate will dissolve. And when the precipitate will dissolve, because these are white precipitate, when the white precipitate dissolve, what will the observation? It will be a colorless solution. Aluminium ion, and we add sodium hydroxide, white precipitate, which dissolve in excess. Test 1 was repeated with aqueous ammonia. If we have aqueous ammonia and we are adding aqueous ammonia to a salt which contain aluminium, what will the observation? So again, it will be white PPT. In exam, instead of writing complete precipitate, you can write PPT. But what will happen when we add an excess? Aqueous ammonia, we add an excess. What will observe? So precipitate insoluble So there will be a white precipitate which will be insoluble in excess. Like if we add more than enough, then it won't dissolve. To the third test tube of a solution of a dilute hydrochloric acid followed by barium chloride. What is this test for? Which ion we test when we add barium chloride or a barium nitrate? If we test barium chloride or barium nitrate, what is this test for? Sulfate. So it's a sulfate test for sulfate ion SO4. If it was test for sulfide ion, we add hydrochloric acid and heat, and we test with the acidified potassium manganate, which changes from purple to colorless. But if there is no change, no reaction is there, so it means there is no sulfate. So this indicates that sulfate is absent. So there is no sulfate ion present in this. To the fourth test tube, aqueous sodium hydroxide was added and aluminium powder. If we add sodium hydroxide and aluminium powder, what is this test for? Which ion we test by this way and we heat? Which negative ion is tested by adding an aluminium powder and sodium hydroxide? You have to use the table. The negative ion which, so that is a test for nitrate. And nitrate, look, two ions give off ammonia gas when added sodium hydroxide, and aluminum powder is for nitrate. But if we add only sodium hydroxide and we heat, if it is ammonium ion, that will also give ammonia gas. So this is a test for nitrate ion. If we add sodium hydroxide and aluminum powder, so the gas release is ammonia, and this confirms that there's a nitrate. So what this indicate about this identity of this compound? Already we know there was aluminum ion, and we identify there's a nitrate ion. So actually it is aluminum nitrate. So this compound is aluminum nitrate. In paper 6, you will have that table. You just use the table and write the observations. What does test B tell you about solid E? What this test B indicate? What this indicate? It's a hydrated salt. So here, what does indicate? You will mention it is a hydrated salt. Identify the gas given off in C4. Which gas is released in C4? This one. Which gas is this? Which turned the damp litmus paper blue. The only alkaline gas is ammonia. So the gas which is given off is ammonia here. What conclusion can you draw about solid E? So solid E, we know already it's aluminium. There is no sulfate. Why? How we conclude that there is no sulfate? Because the negative test was there for sulfate, and it contained what? It contained nitrate. Because there was a positive test for nitrate and the negative test for sulfate. So we can say it is hydrated aluminium sulfate, which does not contain, it is hydrated aluminum nitrate, which does not contain any sulfate. Okay. So mention about, because the test C was indication that there is no sulfate ion. So you should mention there is no sulfate and it contains nitrate. Is it clear, this question about the identification?